Ever think about a company you love? One that just seems invincible, like it'll be around forever. Now imagine it just vanishes, almost overnight. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but this kind of corporate collapse happens way more often than you think. Today, we're going to dissect exactly what goes wrong when good companies go bad.
So here's a question for you. What could a massive corporate giant like Enron possibly have in common with, say, the worst boss you've ever had? It seems like a weird comparison, right? But it actually gets to the very heart of why organizations both big and small ultimately fail. And the answer, well, it pretty much boils down to one word: leadership. So here's what we've got on tap. We're going to start with the big stories, the giants that fell. Then we'll have a little fun with a satirical how-to guide on being a truly terrible manager. After that, we'll hear some real-life horror stories from the trenches, and we'll break down the actual psychology of what makes a workplace toxic. And finally, we'll arm you with the warning signs so you can spot a sinking ship before you go down with it.
All right, let's kick things off with some cautionary tales. These are the big ones, the corporate titans that just fell from grace. And these stories, they aren't just about numbers on a balance sheet. Not at all. They're about the very real human cost of truly catastrophic leadership.
First up, Enron. Man, if you are around in the late 90s, Enron was it. They were the darlings of Wall Street, hailed as the absolute future of energy. They just seemed totally untouchable. But, as we all know now, behind all those glossy annual reports and that soaring stock price, something really rotten was going on. A massive deception was unfolding.
And look, this wasn't just some accounting error or a bad business decision. No, this was a deliberate, systematic fraud. We're talking executives creating this maze of shell companies, using every accounting trick in the book to hide billions, literally billions, in debt, and just inventing profits out of thin air. They lied to everyone, to investors, to regulators, and worst of all, to their own employees, so many of who lost their entire life savings. The lesson here is pretty brutal, but it's simple. A culture that's built on a foundation of lies, it's going to collapse every single time. Okay, let's shift gears to a completely different kind of failure. And this one, well, this one probably hits a little closer to home for a lot of us. Toys R Us? I mean, it was more than just a store, right? It was a huge part of so many of our childhoods. So when it went bankrupt back in 2018, it was a genuine shock. How could a brand that we all love just disappear? See, this wasn't like Enron's big, dramatic implosion from fraud. The end of Toys R Us was more like a slow, painful slide into irrelevance. While the entire world was stampeding online, their leadership just clung to the past, to their physical stores. It's like they were so busy defending their old castle that they didn't even notice a whole new world being built right outside the walls. The takeaway here is crystal clear. These days, innovation, it's not some nice-to-have luxury. It's the price you pay just to stay in the game. All right, so we've seen the grim reality of what happens when leadership goes wrong. But now, let's have some fun with it. Let's flip the whole script. What if your goal was to be a terrible manager? Like truly awful. What would that playbook look like? Let's dive into this satirical guide to being the worst boss ever. And of course, who would endorse a guide like this? Well, none other than the queen of soul-crushing bureaucracy herself, Dolores Umbridge. I mean, if she thinks it's a good idea, you know you're headed in exactly the wrong direction. Her stamp of approval is basically the ultimate red flag. And hey, just in case Dolores Umbridge was a little too subtle for you, here's another glowing review, this time from Ramsay Bolton. You know, when your management style gets a thumbs up from a fictional psychopath, it's probably a good time to, rethink your entire life strategy. These aren't management tips, they're basically villain origin stories. I just love this definition. It's the perfect twisted logic of a total control freak. See, to a terrible boss, transparency isn't about building trust. Oh no, it's about losing power. Because if people actually know what's going on, they might start asking questions. And in a really toxic place, questions are treated like a threat. So the real goal is to keep everyone guessing, keep them in the dark. It's just so much easier to control people that way. You know, the satire works because there's a kernel of truth in it, right? But behind the jokes are the very real, often soul-crushing experiences of people who have actually worked in places like this. So let's shift from the playbook to the painful reality. These are real stories from real people in the trenches. This one's a classic. It has nothing to do with productivity or getting work done. It's all about performing loyalty. It's a power play, pure and simple. The unspoken rule is your time belongs to me. I bet that sounds familiar to a few of you. And then you get to this level. Think about it. When you have to ask permission to use a paperclip, the company is screaming a message at you, and that message is, we do not trust you. At all. With anything. I mean, it's hard to think of anything more demoralizing. Any shred of trust is just gone. Honestly, you couldn't make this up if you tried. This has nothing to do with saving a few pennies. This is about creating a culture of fear and total control. And let's be real, a company that treats its employees like toddlers, policing how much soap they use, that company is already rotting from the inside out. It's just a symptom of a much, much deeper problem. So we've seen the stories. We've gone from these huge corporate collapses all the way down to the daily misery of a toxic office. But the big question is, why? Why does this happen? What's really going on underneath it all? Well, it turns out there's a really powerful framework that helps us understand the anatomy of it all. And this is a really important point. We're not just talking about a boss who's incompetent or bad at their job. No, destructive leadership is an active thing. It's intentional. It's all about a leader who puts their own selfish needs, whether it's power, money, or just control, way ahead of the well-being of their team and, frankly, the success of the whole company. But here's the thing. A destructive leader can't actually create all this chaos on their own. They need help. And there's this really fascinating model called the toxic triangle, which shows that for this kind of leadership to really take hold and grow, you need 3 key things to line up, creating a perfect storm of dysfunction. Okay, so element 1 of the triangle, the destructive leaders themselves. Now, these people are often super charming, really charismatic on the surface. That's how they get into power. But underneath all that charm is some serious narcissism. You know the type. The boss who takes all the credit when things go well, but the second there's a problem, bam, you're under the bus. For them, power is all about personal gain, not the good of the team. But a toxic leader is totally powerless without followers. And this is the second part of the triangle. They basically come in 2 flavors. You've got your conformers. These are the folks who just go along with it, maybe out of fear, maybe insecurity. They just want to keep their heads down. But then you have the colluders, and these guys are way more dangerous. They're the true believers. They're actively helping the bad boss because they're hoping to get a little piece of that power for themselves. And that brings us to the third and final piece of the puzzle, the environment. See, toxicity loves chaos and instability. That's where it grows best. When there are no checks and balances, when there's nobody around to challenge the leader's bad decisions, that's when the poison spreads. I mean, that's the story of Enron, right? The board was completely asleep. And in a different way, it's also the story of Toys R Us, where this culture of this is how we've always done it created an environment where nobody was brave enough to sound the alarm. Okay, so we've dug into the theory. Now let's get practical. How can you, right now, spot the warning signs that a company, maybe even the one you're working for, is headed down a really dangerous path? What are the actual red flags you need to be looking for? All right, here's a simple one, but it's surprisingly effective as an early warning system. People online swear by this. It's called the coffee test. And yeah, it might sound kind of silly, but it's built on a really powerful idea. The little things, they always reveal the big things. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? Look, it's not actually about the coffee. It's about what taking away the coffee symbolizes. It's one of the first, most visible signs that a company is starting to cut costs in a way that directly hits employee morale. It's a signal that bigger problems are definitely brewing. So think of this list as your survival guide, and it's crowdsourced from people who've actually lived through a corporate collapse. When you see your best coworkers, the real top performers, start quietly leaving, they're the canaries in the coal mine. When you start hearing whispers that vendors aren't getting paid on time, well, the ship has taken on water. Trust me, this stuff isn't just office gossip. These are the early tremors before the earthquake hits. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. When a company completely fails, who's really to blame? Is it all on one bad leader at the top? Or, like that toxic triangle suggests, is it more of a perfect storm, where you have a destructive leader, the right kind of followers, and a broken environment all coming together? After hearing all this, I'm curious. What do you think? Where does the blame really lie?